All right, so as far as videos go on this channel, this one is going to be an interesting one because Stats Canada has released their December inflation numbers, and well, they are interesting to say the least. There might actually be some good news on the horizon, but that is happening as Scotiabank is predicting that we will see up to 2% in interest rate increases in 2022, which I think is absolutely absurd, but that is their prediction, and they've got some really smart people working on that. I'm going to talk about all that in this video, as well as what it means for you and what you should be doing with your mortgage at the very end. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit, product, penalty, price in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. All right, so let's get into it. Let's discuss Stats Canada and the inflation numbers for December. This is going to be some interesting data. It's going to be an interesting video. Lots of news today on all of these things, which I find really, really interesting and which I love looking at, because if you just look at the headlines, it always tells one story. But when you start looking at the numbers and the data behind it, it starts to shed a little bit more light on what's actually going on. And perhaps there's some bright light at the end of this tunnel, which is the December CPI numbers. But before we get into it, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers, where when we hit 25,000 subscribers, we're going to give away $5,000 to one lucky winner. We just gave away $1,200 to two lucky winners for when we hit 20,000 subscribers. And it looks like, thanks to that video we did yesterday with our 5 friends from across the country, if you haven't seen that, check it out. It looks like we're going to hit that 25,000 number pretty soon. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. You have to be subscribed to win. And by the way, don't forget about our Secrets to Getting the Lowest Interest Rate course. If you are in the market for a mortgage and you've wondered how to get the best rate, while also making sure that you don't make any huge mistakes that are going to cost you $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 down the road, well, the Secrets to Getting the Lowest Interest Rate course is for you. It tells you all the things about how to negotiate with brokers and banks and how much margin is in the mortgages so you can actually negotiate it down, and also the other things that you may be surprised you can actually get included in the price. So if you want to take that course, if you want to have all of that information, go to ratesecrets.ca. It's Secrets to Getting the Lowest Interest Rate, and it will save you at least 10 to 50 times your money. And by the way, if you decide, hey, this isn't for me, I just want to have Mortgage 360 go and find me the absolute best mortgage for my needs, well, it gives you 10 times your money back just for taking that course and just for completing your mortgage with Mortgage 360. So again, ratesecrets.ca, and let's get into the video. Let's talk about what's going on in the economy. And as we like to do, I'm going to jump you into my screen here and show you what's going on in the headlines. First and foremost, I'm going to start with this. Scotiabank sees Bank of Canada hiking rate to 2% to quell inflation. Scotiabank has been the most negative and the most hawkish when it comes to inflation and interest rates over the last couple of months here. They made news a few months ago when they stated that the Bank of Canada would likely increase interest rates by 2% over the next 2 years. They are now predicting that the Bank of Canada is going to increase interest rates by 1.75% over the next 12 months. So they are getting even more hawkish, which I find is quite interesting. And if you go ahead and you take a look at their predictions here, they're suggesting that we are going to see a 25 basis point increase this week. Then we are going to see another 25 basis point increase in March, and then another 50 point increase in April, which, you know, if I was the Bank of Canada, I probably wouldn't be increasing it by 25, and then 50. If I'm going to make a 0.5% change or a 0.5% increase in interest rates, I'm probably going to do it on one of the first interest rate hikes instead of one of the latter ones, because it will just make sense from the perspective of putting the brakes on the economy right away and putting the brakes on price increases so that it happens really, really quickly, as opposed to just kind of trickling in rate increases and then doing one big one after that. So I'm not sure I necessarily agree with this. Obviously, as economists, we make better predictions in hindsight than we do in foresight. But, you know, interesting here to see that Scotiabank is saying inflation is high, something needs to be done, and predicting pretty significant rate increases over the next little while. Now, as far as my personal predictions go, do I think it's going to be as high as that? Probably not. The thing that I always point out about chief economists with different banks and different organizations is that, yes, while they have a lot of experience and we can't discount that experience, they also tend to have that period of the 1980s as their reference period. Therefore, they go to that 5% increase in a very short period of time ideology from the 80s, which I think kind of sways their opinion in a more hawkish tone. Obviously, the Bank of Canada governor and the people who sit on the Bank of Canada also kind of come from that generation. But as younger economists tend to come through the ranks, they tend to go to more optimistic tone, and that is lower rate increases. And the reality of it is we don't know what will happen when they start increasing interest rates. But whether or not they increase them that significantly, you have to look at it through the lenses that those particular economists are looking at it through. And well, I think their predictions are valid, and I think there's something we have to pay attention to. I'm not exactly sure that that's where we're going to end up. We might, but that's not what I predict, and that's because I come from probably a little bit more of a optimistic generation when it comes to the economy, having not necessarily been there and seen super high interest rates firsthand, which in all honesty could be a reason that I am more swayed to the other side and therefore less reliable as well, and also significantly less experience than what they have. So you kind of have to take a look at both sides and very much figure it out for yourself with respect to where you personally lie, and then make your decisions based on that. Now, obviously, that comes kind of on the heels of what's going on with inflation. We've probably all heard by now, because it's the end of the day, that Canadian consumer inflation hits the highest rate since 1991. That is 4.8%. By the way, in November, it was 4.7%, so not significantly higher than what it was in the previous month. In fact, the actual cost of goods went down compared to November of last year. So let me show you that real quickly. I always like to take a look at what's actually happening with the CPI basket, because if you take a look over here, way over to the right, we see the November value for the CPI basket is 144.2, and then in December, it is 144.0. Now, this is the first time since December of 2020, so not this last December, but the December prior, where the value of the basket of goods has actually gone down, which I think is a really good sign, because what that means is that some of that upward pressure is perhaps not necessarily there. And this is as we come out of the Christmas season, where typically demand is higher, and you would expect that the price of goods would be higher. So therefore, this is actually really good news that we're seeing this number not be significantly higher than the November numbers. Because if you go back and you look going back to December of 2020, you can see that this number has consistently gone up every single month until we get to now, which is December of 2021. And here's the thing is, let's say that the number stays at 144 or around 144 for the next few months. Let's say, we hope that supply chain issues start to abate, and we hope that some of the demand in the economy starts to get sucked out as people stop spending and spending and spending. We saw the Myers-Norris Penny report this week that said people were in significant amounts of debt, and half of Canadians were within $200 of not being able to make their next debt payment. Well, let's say that as a result, we see this 144 number. Oh, and by the way, gas prices have come down. They aren't rising as much as they were previously. So we see this number stay at 144. Well, if it stays at around 144 for the next 2 or 3 months, then we could foreseeably by April have inflation that is back under 3%. And that would be really, really, really good news. Now, the test will be what happens in January, February, March with respect to prices on things. It'll have a lot to do with what happens with gasoline prices. And what we're seeing right now is gasoline and oil is in high production mode. And we're seeing not as much potential for those oil prices to go up significantly over the next couple of months. Now that can change really drastically, but everything is pointing to the fact that perhaps, just perhaps, we're starting to hit that stabilization period. And I think by April, we're very much going to be able to tell what is going to happen. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, especially from the Bank of Canada's perspective, because right now the sentiment is saying that the Bank of Canada has the, let's call it, moral authority from Canadians to go ahead and start increasing interest rates. That's clear in the news media. That's clear in the surveys. Nanos did a survey recently with respect to this, as did several other research organizations. And it's starting to seem like Canadians are willing to accept higher interest rates. So what that does is that gives the Bank of Canada the ability to, at least in theory, move up that March increase to next week, January. And the question is whether or not they're going to actually do this. And it's looking like they've got the mandate from Canadians to go ahead and do it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, the other side of that conversation is seeing what we're seeing now and seeing that the prices are coming down a little bit in December, and kind of having this point in time where we could look into January and go, well, what if prices don't go up that much in January? Well, that could lead the Bank of Canada to go, maybe we should just wait and see what happens over the next month or two and see if inflation actually goes up. and if the consumer price index goes up, and as a result, maybe we can wait till March to actually see what happens. Now, my guess is, and this is just my guess, is the Bank of Canada is going to see the opportunity right now to put the brakes on inflation, and they are going to increase interest rates on January 26th next week. And they're going to do that because they have this opportunity now where things are settling down and things start to look like they're going to slightly come back to normal, to just kind of say, hey, you know what, now's the time to put the brakes on that and have a pretty significant impact. Because if they don't make any sort of changes, well, February, March, April roll around, prices continue to go up, and then they're even further behind the 8 ball than they are right now. And by the way, a lot of banks, a lot of economists think that they are way behind the 8 ball, and the Federal Reserve Bank in the US, who is seeing 6, 7, 8% numbers on their inflation rates, they are way, way behind the 8 ball when it comes to inflation in the US. So expect that they're probably going to start making some moves pretty soon here as well. Now, I do want to show you, as one last thing, I do want to show you just the basket weights and what inflation looks like in different areas of the economy right now. Obviously, the overall number is 4.8%. If you're in Prince Edward Island, that number is up around 6.7%. If you're in Nunavut, you're looking at 2.7% inflation rates, and then this 3.5 that's kind of in the middle is Saskatchewan. If we start looking at different areas of the economy, food is up about 5.2% over last year. If we look at shelter costs, those are up again about 5.4%, unless you're in Prince Edward Island, where housing prices and shelter prices are up about 12%. Remember, this isn't the real estate values, this is the cost of shelter. So that includes lower interest rates, which affect the actual payments and the actual cost of shelter. And then if we start looking at household operations, so this is furnishing, equipment, insurance, and so on and so forth, this is actually looking pretty good. We're only up about 2%, which means there's been moderate increases in those items. And moving into things like clothing and footwear, only 1.1% increases now with supply chain issues, with fuel prices higher. You would expect this to be higher than expected, but what this tells us is when clothing and footwear prices start to go down, what that tells us is that people are spending less on things that they don't necessarily need, because last season's clothing ends up being something that they can wear for another season, and they're spending less and less there, which usually means that the economy is going to start spending less overall, and we're going to start to see a slowdown, and hopefully a slowdown in price increases across the board. Now, as far as transportation goes, this is a big one, up 9%. A lot of this has to do with increased travel, as people are just getting tired of being in Canada and wanting to go to Mexico and Hawaii and the US and so on and so forth. We're personally part of this group who just decided in the last couple of months we're going to start traveling again. We were in New York, we were in Las Vegas, we were in Hawaii. There's other trips planned in the near future down to the US. We had a trip to Mexico that we planned that we actually canceled. But this higher transportation cost is in large part due to people traveling more via airlines. And then if we get to the last two here, we look at health and personal care. This is only up by about 2.6%, which I think is a good thing with respect to the overall economy. And then recreation, education, and reading, we're up about 1.9%, which is, again, that's where when people are spending less on recreation and things like that, that is typically a sign that people are starting to spend less in the overall economy. And one last one here, what is this? The red one, alcoholic beverages, only up about 2.5%, except if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador or Prince Edward Island. I'm not sure why those numbers are significantly higher, but overall across Canada, alcohol beverages, tobacco products, and recreational cannabis are not super high priced, which is probably an indication that spending is about to slow down as well. So some interesting things happening here. The question that we're obviously getting quite frequently is, what do I do with my mortgage? What do I do with my variable rate mortgage? Again, this all comes down to when they start to increase interest rates, not panicking, going to your mortgage calculator, figuring out, okay, what's the rate I can lock in at? What is my current variable rate? Should I stick to my variable rate based on the difference between the payments? Most people are probably going to stick to a variable rate, given the fact that they are going to save a significant amount of money by continuing to be in that variable rate product, even as interest rates go up. And ultimately what it comes down to is, how much more do you think interest rates are going to go up? Do you think that Scotiabank is accurate in their 7 increases in 2022 prediction? Or do you think it is less than that? And then ultimately, what's it worth to you to pay a higher interest rate right now in order to make sure you're protected from higher rates? So that's really what it all comes down to, is personal risk tolerance. And I'm going to guess that most people, when they see the savings, are going to say, hey, it's probably worth it for me to stick where I am right now. And ultimately, if it's going to keep you up at night, yeah, lock into a fixed rate mortgage, know where you're at for the next 2 or 3 years. But what it absolutely all comes down to is your personal risk tolerance and how you feel about the economy going forward and the level of anxiety that it's creating for you. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. Don't forget about that race to 25,000 subscribers, and we'll see you on the very next one. Cheers.